Have you ever wondered how many times love has stepped into your life disguised as routine? Sometimes it shows up in the least expected places, between endless meetings, stacks of papers, and glances no one dares to interpret. The pain of loneliness, the fear of rejection, and the uncertainty about the future are feelings every heart has known. But what if, in the most unlikely setting, a romance was born, one powerful enough to challenge certainties and transform destinies? They say the heart doesn't belong in the corporate world. After all, how can you expect love in an environment ruled by goals, deadlines, and constant pressure? But maybe that's one of the biggest illusions we carry. It's often in the clash between reason and desire that the most passionate stories begin. And when the unexpected happens, no business etiquette guide can stop what quietly roots and grows like fire. Avery Harris, 27, knew all too well what it meant to prove herself in a world where kindness was often mistaken for weakness. Smart and dedicated, she took a temporary job as a secretary at a prestigious tech company in San Francisco. Her gentle smile stood out against the rigid atmosphere of the office, and that was exactly what drew attention. She never imagined that such a simple beginning would lead her down a path where career and love would walk side by side, though not without painful trials along the way. On the other side was Jackson Adams, 40, the CEO known for his almost military discipline. Serious, demanding, incapable of showing weakness in public. To many, he was nothing more than the symbol of power and corporate coldness. But behind the closed doors of his office was a man tired of masks, carrying a sensitivity few had ever dared to see. And it was precisely that hidden part of him that Avery would awaken, without ever meaning to. While coworkers fueled gossip and suspicions, something deeper began to grow between them. The paradox was clear. The more Jackson tried to keep his distance, the more inevitable their connection became. And Avery, torn between her ambition to build a career and the quiet passion that was blossoming, had to face a question so many of us have asked ourselves. Is it worth risking the heart for something that could change our entire life? Perhaps the biggest surprise in this story isn't just the love that emerges, but the choices it demands. Because love is not only about feeling, it's about deciding, confronting, risking. And the moment Avery first walked through that office door, destiny had already prepared something far greater than she could have ever imagined. A secret ready to change her life forever. The first day of a new phase in life always brings that mix of nerves and anticipation. Avery felt it the moment she walked through the glass doors of the tech company in San Francisco. The building seemed to reflect not only modernity, but also the pressure of an environment where only the strongest thrive. She knew that being competent wouldn't be enough. She had to show confidence in the middle of competition disguised as politeness. Her footsteps echoed louder than they really were, as if every curious glance was measuring whether this young woman belonged there or not. Yet behind her gentle demeanor, there was a quiet strength, ready to prove that dedication can shape destinies. From an early age, Avery believed that work should never crush a person's essence. Still, being there meant facing a dilemma. How could she grow in a corporate world that so often demanded coldness without losing the kindness that made her unique? It was like walking a tightrope between efficiency and humanity. As she arranged the documents on her desk, she realized that even the simplest gestures would be noticed. Deep down, she longed to be recognized not just for results, but for the way she inspired trust. What she didn't yet know was that this very trait would leave a mark on people's hearts and maybe even on someone she never expected. In that corporate setting, everything seemed calculated. The glances, the whispers in the hallways, the smiles that felt more rehearsed than sincere. Avery, with her natural way, stood out from that symphony of formalities. She was like a soft melody in the middle of the city's traffic. She remembered her sister Stella's words, "Don't let anyone steal the light in your eyes just because the world insists on being gray." Maybe that was exactly what kept her strong, because even when the first subtle criticisms appeared, she held on to the certainty that passion and purpose can coexist anywhere. With every new task, Avery noticed how her coworkers watched not only her efficiency, but also the way she handled stressful situations. A delay in submitting reports, for instance, never made her lose her calm. Instead, she took a deep breath, reordered her priorities, and found quick solutions. That skill came from past jobs that were far less glamorous, where she had learned to improvise without losing her grace. To some, it seemed like naivete. To others, it was a rare sign of balance, and without even realizing it, she was starting to draw more attention than she had imagined. What stood out the most were the small gestures that revealed who she truly was. The smile offered to someone going through a tough day, the patience to explain something she could have ignored, the way she thanked even for the simplest cup of coffee. These details, though invisible to many, carried great weight, because love, romance, and even desire don't just spring from grand moments. They grow out of little things repeated day after day. Avery wasn't trying to charm anyone. She just wanted to live her truth. But without meaning to, she was planting seeds that would quietly take root in attentive hearts around her. And so, in that first chapter of her journey, Avery began to see that the true challenge wasn't just about proving her technical skills. It was about resisting the pressure to mold herself into a standard that didn't match her essence. And though she didn't yet realize it, each choice she made was leading her closer to an unexpected path, one where reason and emotion would walk side by side. Sometimes destiny reveals itself in the most unlikely places, and this new chapter was only beginning to write something greater than any plan she could have imagined. Jackson Adams had always been known for his impenetrable demeanor. To most, he was the classic example of a CEO, disciplined, straightforward, and at times cold in the way he led meetings. But that morning, as Avery calmly presented documents, something in him wavered. It wasn't just the content that caught his attention, but the human way she handled unexpected setbacks without losing the gentleness in her eyes. What others saw as simple efficiency, Jackson felt as a breath of fresh air in an environment suffocated by speed and rigidity. And without realizing it, his gaze lingered longer than it should have. While the directors debated numbers, Avery stayed composed, organizing reports as if she were conducting an orchestra. From his seat, Jackson observed every move. He was used to the almost mechanical efficiency of his staff, but there was something different about her, a balance of discipline and warmth that made the work feel lighter. It was as if her love for life showed even in the smallest details of her tasks. Deep down, Jackson began to wonder if he had underestimated the strength of a genuine feminine presence in such a calculated environment. It wasn't common for Jackson to let himself get distracted during important meetings, yet that day, when Avery calmly explained the solution to a problem that had delayed the schedule, he found himself focused not only on her words, but on the way she projected confidence. Her soft tone, combined with an unexpected firmness, made an impression. It was like watching someone who carried passion for what they did, even in moments that demanded nothing more than technical skill. And to him, that combination felt too rare to ignore. Jackson recalled conversations with Asher, his friend and marketing director, about how the company needed people who could bring together competence and humanity. He had never paid much attention to that thought until Avery appeared. In that moment, he started to realize that the pursuit of results didn't have to stand alone. It could walk hand in hand with more human values. The contrast between her and the rest of the employees was striking, and it made him reflect on how much his coldness had both protected him and imprisoned him. Curious, Jackson began to notice details he would have overlooked before. The way Avery greeted each colleague by name, her habit of thanking the doorman every morning, even the light touch in her handwritten notes. Small things, but they revealed who she was inside. It wasn't just about competence.
There was a certain poetry in the way she lived even the most ordinary moments. That disarmed him in a subtle, almost imperceptible way, as if a crack of light had found its way into his steel routine. And though he gave no clear signs, something restless was growing inside him. How could someone so used to being in control be drawn to something so unpredictable? Jackson didn't fully understand it yet, but he already knew this young woman would not be just another employee in his memory. Something bigger was unfolding, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. And just like Avery, he was about to discover that destiny loves to play with glances that meet at the right time, and sometimes in the most unexpected place.
At the heart of every company, there are always side stories that never appear in reports but drift through the hallways like secrets carried in whispers. With Avery, it was no different. It only took a few days for glances to turn into quiet remarks. Some admired her dedication, but others twisted her closeness with Jackson into something malicious. Each time he addressed her with more attention than usual during a meeting, the rumors grew stronger. And even though she pretended not to notice, the atmosphere became heavy, like a hidden romance written out of misunderstandings. Joyce Hamilton, who had long held a position of respect in the administrative department, was the first to feel the shift. For her, Avery's arrival wasn't just a new face, but a threat. Her suspicion deepened whenever she saw Jackson entrust Avery with reports or delegate responsibilities directly to her. Silent jealousy slipped into her gestures, turning courtesy into coldness. Avery, with her sensitivity, noticed the distance, but chose silence. After all, she believed love and desire couldn't be born out of intrigue, only out of authentic choices. The company's hallways, once just paths for hurried steps, now felt like stages for sideways glances. The moment Avery walked by, conversations would change in tone, as if her presence alone called for analysis. What was curious was that many of these judgments didn't come from pure malice, but from her colleagues' own insecurities. It was easier to invent stories than to admit the admiration they felt. And so, she became the unwilling character in a narrative she hadn't chosen to write. Even as she tried to ignore it, every whisper reminded her that the corporate world is also made of invisible battles. Avery learned to walk with her head held high, though inside she carried the weight of the pressure. She often remembered her sister Stella's words, "When they can't put out your light, they'll try to stain it." Those words echoed whenever she found herself the target of unfair remarks. In that contrast, she drew strength, reminding herself that passion for what she did had to speak louder than any malice. And while she kept smiling on the outside, there were moments when her heart trembled with insecurity, because no one is made of steel. What stood out most was that amid all this tension, some employees began quietly standing up for her. A colleague from another department, for instance, once said, "She's just doing her job with competence. It's not fair to judge her this way." These voices, still timid, were like sparks of hope in the middle of the darkness. They showed that no matter how loud the criticism became, there would always be those who recognized the truth, and that silent recognition gave Avery the strength to keep going. And Jackson, even without admitting it, noticed the glances and the comments drifting through the hallways. His position required neutrality, but his heart grew heavy with the injustice taking shape. He knew the line between authority and vulnerability was far too thin to cross. Yet every time he saw Avery maintain her kindness in the face of coldness, something in him shifted. And that part of him, still restrained, was about to be tested as their working hours grew increasingly closer and more confidential.
Overtime had become more and more common, and with it, the cold walls of the office began to witness conversations that went far beyond spreadsheets and reports. Avery, sitting in front of a stack of documents, often found herself surprised by Jackson's quiet presence beside her. The CEO, usually distant, now spent more time in the conference room,
reviewing contracts while exchanging brief remarks with her. It was almost strange how, in between spreadsheets, unexpected confidences would surface, as if work was nothing more than an excuse for two souls to meet, souls that weren't yet ready to reveal themselves completely. Little by little, Jackson revealed sides of himself no one could have imagined. One late night, while wrapping up a project, he told Avery about his youth in Boston, the nights he spent studying while his friends were out having fun. In his voice, there was a mix of pride and melancholy that touched her deeply. She realized that behind his unshakable discipline stood a man carrying invisible scars. And in that moment, it wasn't the CEO speaking, but someone longing to be understood, someone who needed to be seen beyond his title. Avery, in turn, began sharing pieces of her own journey. She spoke about Stella, her sister, and how she often felt the weight of being a role model for her. She admitted that her biggest fear was losing her essence in the middle of the corporate rush, leaving behind the values that had always guided her. Jackson listened intently, never interrupting, as if each of her words held the power to unlock doors he had kept closed for years. There was a quiet longing in him to better understand the woman who carried both sweetness and strength in such a rare way. What began as small talks about deadlines slowly turned into deep conversations about choices and sacrifices, and even without saying it aloud, romance lingered in the pauses between words, in a glance that lasted a second too long, in the heavier breath when silence filled the room. These were subtle signs, invisible to the world, yet intense enough for both of them to realize they were crossing a fragile line. The boundary between professionalism and emotion grew thinner with every passing day. There was one night in particular when the tension became impossible to ignore. While they were reviewing a presentation, Jackson let out an unexpected smile at one of Avery's simple remarks. It was like a ray of light breaking through a gray sky. Her heart raced, though she tried to hide it by shuffling the papers on the desk. Small as these moments were, they fed her certainty that something was beginning to bloom. The effort to keep things strictly professional clashed with how naturally feelings seemed to arise. And so, between stacks of folders and whispered confidences shared in silent hours, their closeness became inevitable. What was once only professional respect now carried an intensity that was hard to ignore. They both felt it, yet neither dared to give a name to what was growing between them. But the heart rarely asks for permission to speak, and with each passing minute side by side, it became clearer that the fragile line between reason and emotion would soon be tested in an even deeper way.
No matter how much time Avery and Jackson spent together, there was always an invisible barrier hanging between them. The CEO kept his rigid posture, as if he were building walls against any emotion that dared to slip through. Avery noticed that effort, and even though she understood it, she couldn't help but be hurt by the silence he carried. It was as if every gesture she made was a plea for closeness, yet all she found was the cold discipline that defined him. Love had begun to take shape, but it was trapped inside a box neither of them dared to open. Avery was fighting her own battles as well. Though she admired Jackson for his strength and intelligence, she feared the distance between their worlds. He was the accomplished man, with a brilliant career and a life that seemed out of reach. She was a young woman just climbing the first steps of her journey. The romance that was blooming felt sweet, yet dangerous. She wondered if she was on the verge of losing herself in a universe that didn't fully belong to her. The dilemma grew heavier with each passing day. On the days when Jackson seemed even more distant, Avery carried a mix of longing and insecurity. Longing to be close, to break through his rigidity and discover what lay beneath the armor he wore. But also insecurity, fear that she wasn't enough, that she didn't belong in his world.
Her heart swung like a pendulum between hope and fear. It was like walking on a road lit by a lighthouse that could go dark at any moment. Jackson, on the other hand, wrestled with his own conflicts. Inside him was a natural urge to protect Avery from the pressures of his position and the company. Yet at the same time, he feared that any sign of closeness would be seen as weakness. His reputation had been built on discipline and results, and he couldn't afford missteps. But every time he heard her voice or met her eyes, he felt the fortress he had built for years begin to crack. Their silent distance did not go unnoticed by their colleagues. Some saw Jackson's rigidity as a mark of professionalism. Others thought it was nothing more than a poorly staged act to hide the obvious. For Avery, every cold gesture felt like an open wound. And still she refused to give up on herself. She knew she had to balance her career and her feelings, even if it demanded a strength almost beyond her reach. After all, she didn't want to be remembered only as the secretary who caught the CEO's attention, but as someone capable of building her own path. And so, in this game of closeness and distance, of glances that burned and silences that froze, Avery began to realize that the true challenge wasn't just earning the respect of the company. It was discovering whether she could love without losing herself, and whether Jackson would be willing to let go of part of his rigidity to live something greater. Destiny seemed to be playing with them, and the choices ahead only added fuel to the tension already burning silently in the halls of the company.
It didn't take long for whispers in the hallways to turn into bolder remarks. Joyce, driven by a mix of jealousy and insecurity, began spreading malicious comments about Avery. She claimed that Avery's quick rise wasn't the result of competence, but of a strategic closeness to the CEO. Those words, spoken in low voices, carried the power to corrode reputations. And even without proof, they started to stain Avery's image within the company. It was as if the romance that had barely begun was being used as a weapon against her. For Avery, facing that judgment felt like carrying an invisible weight. She walked into the office with the same kindness, greeted everyone politely, but no longer felt the same response. Some avoided her eyes, others gave her fake smiles that looked more like masks. With every rumor she overheard, her heart tightened. The desire to prove that her worth came from dedication, not hidden intentions, pushed her to work even harder. But in silence, she wondered how long she could endure such injustice. Jackson, meanwhile, noticed the hostile atmosphere. He saw the sideways glances, the conversations that stopped the moment he entered a room, and he fully understood where it all came from. Yet his silence was complicated. As a leader, he believed he shouldn't get involved in gossip. But as a man, he felt torn watching Avery exposed to such cruelty. His heart burned with the urge to defend her, but reason told him that any gesture could only fuel the rumors further. That conflict was eating away at him. Joyce, fueled by her own bitterness, never missed a chance to suggest that Avery relied on charm rather than talent. In meetings, she would subtly remark that certain tasks seemed too easy for her. Small jabs that sounded like technical critiques but carried poison. Some believed them, others had doubts. What no one realized was that behind Joyce's envy was fear. Fear of losing her place, of being overshadowed, of becoming invisible next to Avery's undeniable presence. Even in the middle of the chaos, Avery refused to give up. She remembered her sister Stella's words, "When someone speaks badly about you, they're only revealing who they are." Those words became her anchor on the hardest days. Still, there were nights when she cried alone, wondering if it was worth fighting in such a toxic environment. The love and quiet romance that were growing became her strength, but also her greatest vulnerability. If it had been only about work, maybe ignoring it would have been easier. But with feelings involved, everything became more delicate. And as the rumors spread like wildfire, one certainty grew stronger.
This phase would be decisive not only for Avery's career, but for her very essence. Jackson's silence, though justified by reason, began to feel like absence. And in the face of that loneliness, Avery realized that life was about to confront her with difficult choices, where love, desire, and career would collide in irreversible ways.
The major project the company had been preparing became the perfect opportunity for Avery to showcase all her talent. It was a strategic presentation, one that could define not only the company's next steps, but also the course of her own career. From the moment she was given the responsibility, she dedicated days and nights to every detail. Her desire to prove her competence outweighed any insecurity. Jackson watched closely, impressed by the passion she poured into every choice. For him, it was no longer just work, it was art. As the project progressed, Avery earned the respect of departments that had once been resistant. Her clarity in presenting ideas, her calm under pressure, and the unexpected firmness in her voice surprised even the most skeptical. But as with any story of ambition and love, this visibility also came with risks. The more she stood out, the more envious glances, harsh comments, and doubts arose behind the scenes. The young woman who had once been invisible was now a target, and it made her reflect on the price of recognition. Jackson, used to dealing with firm directors and investors, began to wonder how a temporary secretary could navigate high-level discussions with such ease. It was impossible not to be captivated. The way she balanced humanity with strategy, firmness with tenderness left him disarmed. Deep down, he knew there was more here than just professionalism. With every meeting, his desire to be by her side grew, not just as a leader, but as a man. Avery, too, felt the weight of this connection. The more Jackson gave her space and trust, the more the silent romance between them seemed visible to others. She knew the line between career and heart was becoming thinner. There were moments when she wondered whether to accept the glance that disarmed her or to turn away to protect her reputation. Her heart raced, but reason reminded her that dreams could be lost in hasty choices. It was her sister Stella who offered the simplest yet most challenging reflection. Why choose between love and career if they can walk together? That question echoed in Avery during the long nights of work. The idea sounded beautiful, but reality was harsh. After all, how many stories had she heard of talented women whose names were reduced to mere gossip after getting involved with powerful men? The fear of sacrifice haunted her as much as the desire to follow her heart. On the day of the presentation, Avery entered the room with the confidence of someone well prepared, yet her heart felt tight. She knew that more than defending numbers and graphs, she was defending herself. As she spoke, she felt Jackson's eyes fixed on her, offering silent support. It was as if two battles were happening at once, one in front of the executives and another inside her own chest. And by the end, the inevitable question remained: how do you choose between the career you've always dreamed of and a love you never imagined living?
The project had been a success. The directors praised Avery's clarity and creativity, and even the most resistant recognized her talent. But when the lights in the conference room went out and silence filled the office, the real tension began. Jackson called her in for a private conversation, wearing that serious look that mixed discipline with vulnerability. Avery felt her heart race before a single word was spoken. She knew something was about to be said, something that could change everything. Jackson wasn't a man for beating around the bush, but that night he seemed to be gathering the strength to break a silence that had weighed on him for weeks. "Avery, I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just professional admiration." The words sounded almost like a whisper, yet they carried the force of a hurricane. Avery froze, her body trembling. It was as if all the romance they had shared through glances and silent gestures had suddenly found its voice.
The desire that had been held back was finally revealed. She couldn't respond immediately. Her mind screamed, reminding her of the gossip, the age difference, and his position in the company. And yet her heart burned at the thought of living a love that seemed impossible. The conflict was intense. How could she allow herself to be vulnerable without risking everything she had worked so hard to achieve? Avery felt as though she was standing at the edge of an abyss, where the next decision would define not just her career, but her very essence. In that moment, she remembered her sister Stella's words. Love shouldn't be a prison, it should be a space where you can be even freer. That memory made her tremble even more. On one side was the fear of losing her identity. On the other was the chance to experience something rare and true. Jackson watched her in silence, respecting her pace, but in his eyes was an intense spark, a mix of desire and hope that left no doubt about the sincerity of his feelings. Avery tried to protect herself, telling herself it was better to keep her distance, but when Jackson extended his hand, the world seemed to stop. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a gesture of surrender. And no matter how much she tried to resist, she felt her heart lean in. Love, after all, doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't wait for the right moment. It simply happens, even when it feels reckless. And in that touch, there was something stronger than any corporate rule. Still, fear didn't vanish. Avery knew that accepting this feeling meant facing judgment, confronting herself, and risking the future she had dreamed of for so long. The dilemma was real. Open her heart to a love she had never imagined, or continue protecting herself behind her discipline and career ambitions. It was a painful awakening, but inevitable, like the dawn breaking through the night even when the sky insists on remaining dark.
After so many nights of inner conflict, Avery finally realized she didn't have to choose between one path or the other. The love growing between her and Jackson wasn't an obstacle, it was a force that could propel her forward. For the first time, she saw that career and romance could walk side by side, as long as there was respect and trust. This realization freed her from an old fear, the fear of losing herself in love, and it was this clarity that allowed her to open her heart completely. Jackson, in turn, was changing as well. The man once known for his rigid discipline and seemingly untouchable demeanor was discovering that vulnerability was not a weakness. On the contrary, it was a sign of courage. With Avery, he felt he could be more human, more connected, more genuine. He no longer needed to hide behind numbers and contracts. The passion between them reminded him that leadership also means knowing how to love, and that the desire to connect deeply with someone can be the greatest driver of change. Over time, the office corridors, once full of gossip and sidelong glances, adjusted to the new reality. Avery's competence silenced criticism, and her firm approach showed that she relied on merit, not favoritism. Even Joyce, though reluctant, had to recognize the space Avery had earned. The romance, which at first seemed fragile against external pressures, grew stronger because both had learned to balance reason and emotion. Outside of work, Avery rediscovered simple joys, walks along the Golden Gate at sunset, long coffees in hidden corners of San Francisco, conversations about dreams and fears that went far beyond the corporate world. In these moments, she realized that the true meaning of love wasn't just in the initial enchantment, but in the daily choice to build something together. And Jackson, used to planning every step, allowed himself to be surprised by her spontaneity, which could brighten even the tensest days. It was as if two different worlds had finally found a point of harmony.
The young dreamer who had feared losing herself in a competitive environment now had someone by her side encouraging her to stay true to herself. And the CEO who believed he could only live surrounded by rigidity discovered that gentleness doesn't weaken, it strengthens. Between them, love blossomed with firm roots, nourished by respect, trust, and mutual choice. And so Avery and Jackson moved forward, aware that challenges would still come. But now, there was a difference. They faced them together. The romance that had been born in silence, amid folders and shared confidences, had transformed into a bond strong enough to overcome any barrier. Because when love, desire, and purpose meet, no distance or prejudice can stand in the way. And in the future they envisioned, they both knew the most important thing wasn't the destination, it was the path they chose to walk side by side.
Between love and career, Avery discovered that it was never about choosing just one path, but about learning to balance the two. The young woman who had arrived shy and unsure at that office was now becoming a confident woman, aware of her worth, and able to love without losing herself. Jackson, in turn, let go of the armor of the untouchable CEO to reveal that behind the discipline and power, there was a man willing to feel, trust, and change. The journey that began with suspicious glances ended in a deep sense of connection. The pressures of the corporate world didn't disappear, and the spiteful comments didn't stop, but none of that had the power to separate them anymore. Their romance flourished, not because it was free of obstacles, but because every challenge strengthened them. And that's where the true essence of love lies, not in the absence of difficulties, but in the courage to face them together. The story of Avery and Jackson is a powerful reminder that our greatest limits are often within ourselves. And when we choose to break them down, we make room to experience love and desire fully. Have you ever experienced something similar? Your story could inspire others who are facing the same dilemma. And don't forget to subscribe to the Eternal Romance Stories channel, where you'll find touching stories, deep reflections, and lessons that go beyond fiction. Here, every episode is a chance to look inward and see what love is truly capable of building. And what's coming next might be even more surprising than you imagine. After all, every ending is just the beginning of a new story.